I found him bleeding in my root cellar 3 hours after the Crimson Ridge train robbery. Clay Brennan, wanted outlaw, $50,000 bounty on his head, bullet hole in his side. He looked at me with eyes that had forgotten mercy and whispered, "Hide me, and I'll tell you where the gold is." I should have turned him in, but federal marshals were burning homesteads, killing innocents to find him. Some choices, I learned, demand you become what you fear most. These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. The desert held its breath the morning they robbed the Crimson Ridge train. I heard about it from old Samuel Hicks, who rode past my homestead on his way to town, his mule kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a ghost refusing to dissipate. He reined in at my fence line, his weathered face creased with the kind of worry that comes from seeing violence up close. "Emma," he called, his voice carrying across the yard where I was hanging laundry on a line strung between two cottonwoods. "You best lock your doors tonight. Clay Brennan's gang hit the eastbound express, killed 3 guards, took the gold shipment meant for the Denver Mint. Federal marshals are coming through, and they ain't asking polite questions." I set down my washing basket, my hands suddenly cold despite the heat radiating off the hard-packed earth. "How much gold?" "50,000 in bullion, maybe more." Samuel spat tobacco juice that sizzled on the ground. "Marshals are saying anyone who harbors the gang will hang alongside them. Best keep your head down, Emma Hartley. Widow woman alone out here. Folks might get ideas about you being involved." He rode off before I could respond, leaving me standing in the yard with wet sheets clinging to my hands and a cold certainty settling in my stomach. Trouble was coming to Crimson Ridge, and trouble had a way of finding isolated homesteads like mine. I lived 5 miles from town on land my late husband Jacob had claimed before tuberculosis claimed him. 2 years of widowhood had taught me to shoot straight, think fast, and trust no one. The homestead consisted of a small cabin, a root cellar dug deep into the hillside, a chicken coop, and 40 acres of stubborn earth that yielded just enough to keep me from starving. It wasn't much, but it was mine, paid for in sweat and grief. That afternoon, I worked in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds from between struggling tomato plants. The sun beat down mercilessly, and by the time I retreated to the cabin for water, my dress was soaked through with sweat. I drank from the tin dipper, standing at the window, watching the horizon where heat shimmered and made the distant mountains look like they were melting. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind through the cottonwoods or the chickens scratching in their coop. This was heavier, labored, human breathing coming from the direction of the root cellar. My husband's rifle hung above the door. I took it down, checked the chamber, and moved toward the cellar with my heart hammering against my ribs. The wooden doors were slightly ajar, which was wrong. I'd secured them that morning after retrieving preserves. I kicked the doors open wide, the rifle raised to my shoulder, finger on the trigger. A man lay sprawled among my jars of pickled vegetables and salted meat, his shirt dark with blood, his face pale as milk. He looked up at me with eyes the color of winter storms, gray, cold, and desperately aware. "Don't shoot," he rasped, his voice gravel over broken glass. "Please." I should have pulled the trigger, should have ridden to town and collected the bounty, should have done 100 things other than what I did. Instead, I asked, "How bad are you hit?" "Bad enough." He tried to sit up and failed, his face contorting with pain. "Bullet went through. Bleeding slowed, but I need help." "You're Clay Brennan," I said, not a question. He laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "Reputation precedes me. You killed 3 men this morning. Guards drew first. We wanted the gold, not bloodshed." His eyes held mine, and I saw something there I didn't expect. Honesty, maybe, or the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too many deaths. "The marshals coming after us aren't interested in justice, ma'am. They're interested in making examples. They've already burned 2 homesteads looking for us, killed a farmer and his boy in Cold Creek, because someone said we'd been seen near there. I'd heard rumors about Marshal Pike Draymond and his methods. The federal government had sent him west with orders to end the train robberies plaguing the territory, and he'd interpreted those orders as permission to wage war on anyone who might shelter outlaws. Why should I believe you? I demanded, because if you turn me in, they'll burn this place anyway. They'll say you harbored me, helped me, were part of the gang. They'll hang you just to send a message. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. Hide me, and when I'm strong enough, I'll tell you where we buried the gold. There's enough there to buy you a new life far from here. A farm back east. Safety. Whatever you want. The rifle felt heavy in my hands. Outside, I could hear horses, distant but approaching fast. Multiple riders moving with purpose. Clay heard them too. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip, but he was too weak to draw it. Your choice, ma'am. Turn me in and die for it. Or hide me, and maybe we both survive. I made my decision in the space between heartbeats. Can you stand? If I have to. I helped him up, his weight nearly pulling me down. Together we staggered deeper into the root cellar, to the back corner where old crates and barrels were stacked. I pulled aside a false wall Jacob had built, a hiding space he'd constructed during the war years when deserters sometimes passed through. Get in. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear. Clay crawled into the space, and I replaced the wall, stacking crates to make it look undisturbed. Then I ran back to the cabin, grabbed a bucket of soapy water, and scrubbed the blood trail from the cellar steps, working frantically as the sound of hooves grew louder. They arrived in a thunder of dust and menace. 6 men wearing federal badges and expressions that suggested they'd forgotten what mercy looked like. Marshal Pike Draymond led them, a tall man with a face like carved granite and eyes that measured everything in terms of guilt. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, not dismounting. We're looking for a wounded man. Outlaw. Dangerous. You seen anyone come through here? I stood in my doorway, the rifle visible but not threatening, channeling every ounce of widow's defiance I'd learned to wear like armor. Haven't seen anyone, Marshal. Just me and the chickens. Draymond studied me with the intensity of a man who'd made a career of finding liars. You live here alone. My husband died 2 years back. Managed fine on my own. Mind if we search the property? It wasn't a question. I stepped aside, letting them ransack my home, overturning furniture, dumping drawers, tearing through my belongings with the casual brutality of men who answer to no one. They searched the root cellar too. I watched from the doorway, my heart in my throat, as one of the deputies moved among the shelves, kicking at crates, peering behind barrels. He stopped near Clay's hiding place, so close that I could see his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Nothing here, Marshal, he called out. Draymond appeared beside me, his breath smelling of tobacco and old coffee. If we find out you're lying, Mrs. Hartley, I'll burn this place to the foundation and hang you from your own cottonwood. Good thing I'm not lying then, Marshal. He smiled, a predator's expression. We'll be watching. Brennan's wounded bad. He'll need help soon, or he'll die. When he comes crawling, you remember what I said. They rode off, leaving my home in ruins and my nerves shattered. When I was certain they were gone, I returned to the cellar and pulled away the false wall. Clay was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his skin clammy with fever. The wound had reopened during the hiding, blood soaking through his shirt in a spreading stain. I'd saved his life, made myself an accomplice, and damned myself in the process. And I still didn't know if I'd made the right choice. But as I carried water and bandages into the cellar, preparing to tend a wounded outlaw while federal marshals patrolled the territory looking for any excuse to kill, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just a widow trying to survive. I'd become something more dangerous. A woman who'd chosen compassion over law, and who would have to live with whatever consequences that choice demanded. 3 days passed in a haze of tending wounds and watching horizons. Clay's fever spiked the first night, his body burning with infection as I fought to keep him alive with cool compresses and what little laudanum I'd saved from Jacob's final days. He thrashed in delirium, crying out names I didn't recognize. "Jack, get down." And sometimes he wept, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. I'd moved him from the cellar to the cabin under cover of darkness. Keeping him hidden in that damp hole would have killed him faster than any marshal's bullet. I'd positioned him in the back room, the one with the small window that overlooked nothing but empty prairie, and I kept the curtains drawn tight against prying eyes. During the daylight hours, I worked the homestead as I always did, feeding chickens, tending the garden, hauling water from the well. Normal, routine, the kind of rhythms that wouldn't attract attention. But every sound made me reach for the rifle. Every dust cloud on the horizon sent my pulse racing. The marshals rode past twice more, their eyes scanning my property with predatory focus. Each time, I met them at the fence line, my expression carefully neutral, answering their questions with the bland politeness of a woman who had nothing to hide. "Still alone, Mrs. Hartley?" Draymond asked on the second visit, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe it. "Still alone, Marshal. Though I'd appreciate it if you'd stop tearing up my property looking for ghosts." He studied me for a long moment, then tipped his hat with mocking courtesy. "We'll find him eventually, and when we do, we'll remember everyone who lied to us." By the fourth day, Clay's fever broke. I found him awake when I brought morning broth, his gray eyes clear but haunted. He watched me set the bowl on the bedside table, his expression unreadable. "You could have let me die," he said, his voice still rough but stronger. "Would have been easier, safer, probably." I sat in the chair I'd pulled beside the bed, exhaustion making my bones feel like lead. But I've seen enough death. Wasn't in the mood to add another body to the count. "The marshals will come back. They always do." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillow. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. The bullet went through clean, but you lost a lot of blood. Another day in that cellar and you'd be dead." I studied his face, younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years outdoors. "Why'd you do it?" "Rob the train." Clay was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where afternoon light filtered through the curtains. "Same reason men do most stupid things. Money, desperation, a belief that the world owed us something." "Did it owe you something?" "Maybe once." His jaw tightened. "I was a rancher before. Had land up in Colorado, cattle of future. Then the railroad came through, decided they needed my water rights for their expansion. Offered me pennies on the dollar. When I refused, they sent hired guns to persuade me." He touched his side where the fresh wound was. "Burned my house, killed my foreman, ran off my stock. When I went to the law, they told me the railroad had legal authority, eminent domain. They called it legal theft." I'd heard variations of this story before. The West was full of men who'd been crushed beneath the wheels of progress, who'd watched everything they'd built disappear into the pockets of Eastern businessmen who'd never set foot in the territories. "So you became an outlaw." "I became what they made me." Bitterness edged his words. "Jack Reeves, my foreman, the one they killed, he had a wife and 2 kids. I'd promised to look after them if anything happened. With my ranch gone, I had no way to keep that promise. The train was carrying payroll gold from the mines, money that belonged to the same railroad that destroyed everything I had. Seemed like justice to take it back. 3 men died. They drew on us first." His eyes met mine, unflinching. "I'm not proud of killing them, but I'm not going to apologize for defending myself either. This territory has 2 kinds of law, the kind that protects rich men's property, and the kind that gets you hanged for trying to survive." I didn't argue. I'd lived here long enough to know he wasn't entirely wrong. The law had protected Jacob and me when we had money to pay lawyers and influence. After Jacob died and the money dried up, suddenly the law had less time for a poor widow's complaints. "Where's the gold now?" I asked. Clay smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Buried, 3 miles north of here, in a canyon called Devil's Throat. We split it 4 ways, me, Silas, Tom, and young Billy. The plan was to lie low for 6 months, let things cool down, then meet up and divide it proper. His expression darkened, but the marshals ambushed us at the hideout. Tom and Silas died in the shootout. Billy got away clean, I think. And well, you know how I ended up. So 3 men died robbing the train, and 2 more died running from it. That's 5 lives for $50,000 in gold. 6, if you count me. I'm dead already, just haven't stopped breathing yet. The resignation in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the hardened outlaw of legend, the cold-blooded killer Draymond described. This was a broken man who'd lost everything and made the kind of desperate choices that came from having nothing left to lose. "You're not dead yet," I said, standing. "And as long as you're under my roof, you'll stay that way. Now drink your broth before it gets cold." Over the following days, Clay grew stronger. He could sit up without pain, could walk a few steps before exhaustion forced him back to bed. We fell into an uneasy routine. I'd work the homestead during the day, and in the evenings we'd talk about his life before the robbery, about my years with Jacob, about the territory and how it had changed since the war. He told me about growing up in Missouri, about learning to rope cattle from his father, about the woman he'd almost married before she died of cholera. I told him about meeting Jacob at a church social in Kansas, about our journey west in a covered wagon, about the hard years of breaking land and building something from nothing. In those quiet hours, with lamplight casting shadows across the small cabin, it became easy to forget that he was an outlaw and I was harboring a wanted man. It became easy to see him as just another soul trying to survive in a world that had grown too hard, too fast. But the world outside didn't forget. On the 8th day, Billy Carver showed up. I was drawing water from the well when I heard the horse approach, walking, not running, which meant whoever it was wasn't in a panic. I turned to see a young man, barely 20, riding a dun mare that looked as exhausted as its rider. He had Clay's eyes, that same winter storm gray, and when he saw me, he pulled up short. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking with youth and exhaustion. "I'm looking for, that is, I heard there might be." "You're Billy," I said quietly, glancing toward the horizon to make sure we weren't being watched. He nodded, relief flooding his face. "Is Clay alive?" "Barely. Get your horse out of sight and come inside. Quick." The reunion was brief but emotional. Billy practically collapsed beside Clay's bed, his young face streaked with tears. "I thought you were dead. Everyone said you were dead." "Takes more than a bullet to kill a stubborn bastard," Clay replied, gripping Billy's shoulder. "You get away clean?" "Clean enough. Doubled back through the mountains, laid low in an abandoned line shack." "But Clay," Billy's voice dropped. "They got Tom and Silas. Hung them in town without trial. Just strung them up and called it justice." Clay's face went hard as stone. "Draymond, yeah, he's got the whole territory locked down tight. Checkpoints on every road, deputies in every town. And he's offering a reward, $10,000 for information leading to your capture, dead or alive." 10,000. That was enough to tempt even honest men. I felt the noose tightening around all of us. "We need to leave," Billy said urgently. "Tonight, head for Mexico, split the gold, disappear." But Clay was looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that made my breath catch. Guilt. "I can't. Mrs. Hartley saved my life. If I run now and Draymond finds out she helped me, he'll burn this place to ash with her inside it." "Then she comes with us," Billy said, as if it were simple. I almost laughed. "I'm not going to Mexico. This is my home." "Your home won't matter if you're dead," Billy argued. He wasn't wrong, but leaving meant abandoning everything Jacob and I had built, meant becoming a fugitive, meant throwing away the life I'd fought so hard to keep. I looked at Clay, at this man I'd saved and shouldn't have, and saw my future balanced on the edge of a knife. "There might be another way," I said slowly, an idea forming. "But it's dangerous, and it requires trust." Clay leaned forward despite the pain it caused. "What are you thinking?" I took a breath. "We give Draymond what he wants. We give him you." The silence that followed my words was absolute. Billy's hand moved to his revolver, and Clay's eyes narrowed with suspicion and something that might have been betrayal. "Explain," Clay said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of dangerous calm that preceded violence. I held his gaze. "Draymond wants you hanged. He wants the gold, and he wants to prove that no one can defy federal authority in this territory. But what he wants most is to look like a hero, the marshal who brought down the Brennan gang and recovered stolen property." "So you're suggesting I just walk into his arms?" Clay's laugh was bitter. "That's not a plan, Mrs. Hartley. That's suicide. Not if we control how it happens." I moved to the table, grabbed a pencil and paper, and began sketching a rough map. Draymond's camped outside Crimson Ridge with his deputies. He's watching the roads, the river crossings, any place you might run. But he's not watching the places he thinks you'd never go. Billy leaned in, curiosity overcoming his suspicion. "Like where?" "Like the marshal's office itself." I tapped the paper. "What if you turned yourself in, but on your terms? What if you walked into town, hands up, and offered a deal, the location of the gold in exchange for safe passage to a territorial trial instead of a hanging?" "Draymond doesn't make deals," Clay said flatly. "Draymond makes deals when it benefits him." I looked between them. "Think about it. If you're captured in a shootout, you're just another dead outlaw. But if you surrender voluntarily, if you cooperate and lead them to the gold, suddenly Draymond looks like a brilliant negotiator instead of just another killer with a badge. The newspapers would eat it up. He'd be famous." Clay was quiet, turning it over in his mind. "And what stops him from just hanging me anyway once he has the gold?" "Witnesses. Lots of them." I warmed to the idea as I spoke. "We do it publicly, in broad daylight, with half the town watching. You ride in, announce you're surrendering, demand a lawyer and a proper trial. Put it all on record before he can silence you. Then he either honors the deal, or he looks like a tyrant in front of everyone." "It could work," Billy said slowly, "but only if we have leverage, something that forces Draymond to keep his word." "Like what?" Clay asked. I met his eyes. "Like the gold itself. What if you don't tell him where it is until after he's agreed to the terms in writing, witnessed by the town mayor and a lawyer? He gets his prize, but only if he plays by civilized rules." It was a desperate plan, full of holes and dependent on Draymond having more pride than viciousness. But it was also the only plan that didn't end with all of us dead or fugitives. Clay studied me for a long moment. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe me anything. You could turn me in, collect the reward, and be done with it." "Because I'm tired of watching men like Draymond burn the world down in the name of justice." I said it quietly, surprised by my own vehemence. "And because if I'm going to risk everything, I'd rather do it trying to prove the law can still mean something instead of just watching it become another tool for powerful men to hurt the weak." Something shifted in Clay's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "If we do this and it goes wrong, you'll hang right beside me." "Then we'd better make sure it doesn't go wrong." We spent the rest of the day planning. Billy rode into town to feel out the situation, to see where Draymond was positioned and whether the town was willing to witness a surrender. He returned after dark with cautiously optimistic news. "There's talk," Billy said, warming his hands by the fire. "People are scared of Draymond. His men have been roughing up anyone they think might be hiding you. Broke old man Henderson's arm yesterday just for not answering questions fast enough. The mayor, fellow named Garrett Moss, he's furious, but too afraid to say anything official." "Would Moss witness a surrender?" I asked. "Maybe, especially if it means getting Draymond out of town faster." Clay nodded slowly. "What about a lawyer?" "There's one, Theodore Price. Came west from Philadelphia. Thought he'd make his fortune in mining claims. Ended up defending drunks and claim jumpers." Billy grinned. "But he hates Draymond. Something about the marshal threatening to hang him for obstruction last year." "Sounds perfect," Clay said drily. "A terrified mayor and a vengeful lawyer. What could go wrong? We set the plan for 2 days hence. That would give Billy time to approach Moss and Price quietly, to feel out whether they'd be willing to participate. It would also give Clay time to regain more strength. He'd need to ride into town on his own power, looking healthy enough that Draymond couldn't claim he was forced or coerced. The night before the surrender, Clay couldn't sleep. I found him sitting on the porch at midnight, staring out at the desert under a sky full of indifferent stars, having second thoughts. I asked, settling beside him, third and fourth thoughts. He didn't look at me. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, Emma. Killed men, stolen, broken promises. But I always told myself I was doing it for the right reasons: justice, survival, protecting people I cared about. And now I'm not sure there's any difference between my reasons and Draymond's. We both think we're righteous. We both think the ends justify the means. Maybe I'm just another kind of monster. I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. The difference is you're questioning it. Draymond never does. He sleeps fine at night because he's convinced himself that might makes right, that power equals morality. You know better. Knowing better doesn't make me good. It just makes me aware of how far I've fallen. Then tomorrow is your chance to climb back up. Not all the way. Maybe you'll never get all the way back, but it's a start. He finally looked at me, and in the moonlight, his face seemed younger, more vulnerable. Why are you so determined to save me? You barely know me. Because someone saved me once, I said quietly. When Jacob died, I had nothing. No money, no family, no way to keep this land. The bank was going to foreclose. And then Samuel Hicks, the old man who warned me about the robbery, he went to every rancher and farmer in the territory and collected money. Just enough to pay off my debt and give me a chance to make the next payment. He didn't have to. I was nothing to him, but he did it anyway. I looked out at the darkness. He told me, the world's hard enough without good people refusing to help each other. So that's what I'm doing. Helping. Because the alternative is letting the hard men win, and I'm not ready to do that yet. Clay reached out and took my hand. His palm was calloused, scarred. The hand of a man who'd known violence. But his grip was gentle. If we survive this, I'm going to pay you back. Every kindness, every risk. I swear it. I'll hold you to that, I said, squeezing his hand once before letting go. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that seemed too beautiful for what we were about to do. Billy saddled the horses while I packed supplies. Clay dressed in his cleanest shirt, strapped on his gun belt, and checked his revolvers one last time before emptying them and stowing the ammunition in his saddlebag. Can't ride unarmed, he said, seeing my questioning look. That'd give Draymond an excuse to shoot me on sight. The ride to Crimson Ridge took an hour. Billy rode ahead as scout, while Clay and I followed at a careful distance. My heart hammered against my ribs the entire way, every instinct screaming that this was madness, that we were riding straight into a trap. But Clay's face was set with determination. He'd made his choice. The town appeared on the horizon like a mirage, withered buildings shimmering in the heat, dust devils dancing through empty streets. It was mid-morning, early enough that most folks would be awake, but not so late that we'd lose the element of surprise. Billy met us at the edge of town, his face tight with tension. Moss and Price are waiting at the mayor's office. Draymond's at the marshal station with 4 deputies. The rest of his men are scattered around town. How many total? Clay asked. 12, maybe 15. Terrible odds, but we'd known that going in. We rode down Main Street slowly, deliberately, 3 abreast. People stopped to stare, shopkeepers in doorways, women clutching children, men with hands moving to weapons. Word spread like wildfire, and within minutes, half the town was emerging to watch. Draymond stepped out of the marshal station, his hand resting on his revolver. His eyes widened fractionally when he saw Clay, then narrowed with predatory satisfaction. "Clay Brennan," he called out, his voice carrying across the street. "You're under arrest for robbery, murder, and crimes against the United States government. Dismount and surrender your weapons." Clay reined his horse to a stop 20 feet away. He sat tall in the saddle, every inch the confident outlaw, giving no sign of the weakness that still plagued him. "Marshal Draymond," Clay replied, his voice equally loud, pitched for the growing crowd. "I'm here to surrender voluntarily and negotiate the terms of my detention. I'm willing to cooperate fully, including revealing the location of the stolen gold, in exchange for guaranteed safe transport to a territorial trial and proper legal representation." Draymond's face darkened. "You are in no position to negotiate, Brennan." "On the contrary, Marshal, I'm in the perfect position." Clay gestured to the crowd. "All these good people are witnesses. They'll testify that I came here peacefully, unarmed, seeking justice rather than violence. They'll also testify to whether you honored that surrender or murdered an unarmed man in cold blood." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Draymond's jaw clenched. "Mayor Moss," Clay called out, "are you present?" A nervous man in a suit emerged from the crowd. "I'm here, Mr. Brennan." "And you, Theodore Price?" A thin man with spectacles stepped forward. "Present." Clay looked back at Draymond. "I propose the following terms to be written and witnessed by these men. I will surrender peacefully and reveal the location of the gold. In exchange, you will transport me to the territorial capital for trial before a proper judge, without prejudice or violence. If you refuse these terms, I'll take my chances in the desert. But either way, this town will know whether their federal marshal is a man of law or just another outlaw with a badge." The silence that followed was explosive. Every eye was on Draymond, waiting to see whether he'd accept or reject the offer. I held my breath, my hand resting near the rifle on my saddle, knowing that if this went wrong, we'd all be dead within seconds. Finally, Draymond spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You've got yourself a deal, Brennan. But if you're lying about that gold, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth and make sure your death takes days, not seconds." Clay dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. "Then I suppose we both have an incentive to keep our word, Marshal." They shackled Clay in the mayor's office, iron cuffs biting into his wrists, while Theodore Price scratched out the terms of surrender on official paper. Draymond stood in the corner, arms crossed, radiating fury barely held in check. His deputies crowded the small room, hands never far from their weapons. Mayor Moss signed first, his hand trembling as he scratched his name across the bottom of the document. Price signed next, then pushed the paper toward Draymond with deliberate slowness. "Your signature, Marshal. Unless you prefer to explain to the territorial governor why you refused a peaceful surrender in front of 50 witnesses." Draymond snatched the pen and signed with enough force to nearly tear through the paper. "There. Happy. Now where's the gold, Brennan?" Clay looked at me before answering, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. We discussed this part carefully. The timing had to be perfect, the revelation strategic. "Devil's Throat Canyon," Clay said, 3 miles north of Mrs. Hartley's homestead. There's an old prospector's cave on the eastern wall, about 20 feet up. The gold's buried inside, wrapped in canvas and sealed in a wooden crate. Draymond's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Deputy Morrison, take 4 men and ride out there now. I want that gold verified before sundown." "No," Clay said quietly. The room went silent. Draymond turned slowly, his expression dangerous. "What did you say?" I said no. "The agreement states I'll be transported to the territorial capital for trial. That transportation begins now, before you recover the gold. Otherwise, what's to stop you from getting what you want and putting a bullet in my head the moment your men ride back?" "The agreement says nothing about when I'll be transported, only that I will be." Clay's voice was steady despite the chains. "We leave now, Marshal. Your deputies can retrieve the gold and meet us in Silver Falls tomorrow. That way we both get what we want, and neither of us has to trust the other more than necessary." I watched Draymond's face turn red, watched his hand drift toward his gun. Price stepped forward quickly, holding up the document. "The agreement does stipulate safe transport, Marshal, and Mr. Brennan's interpretation is reasonable given the circumstances." If you act in bad faith now, this entire surrender becomes null, and you'll have to explain to your superiors why you violated the terms you yourself agreed to. Draymond looked like he wanted to shoot everyone in the room, but he was trapped by his own ambition. He needed this arrest to look legitimate, needed the glory of bringing in Clay Brennan alive and by the book. Murdering him now would raise too many questions. Fine, Draymond spat. We leave in 1 hour. Morrison, take your men and get that gold. The rest of you, prepare for the ride to Silver Falls. The deputies filed out. Price gathered his papers, gave Clay an encouraging nod, and departed as well. That left me, Clay, Draymond, and Mayor Moss in the cramped office. Mrs. Hartley, Draymond said, turning his attention to me like a snake noticing a mouse. Interesting that Brennan happened to hide so close to your property. Interesting that he knew exactly how to find you. Makes a man wonder whether you've been entirely truthful with me. My blood ran cold, but I kept my expression neutral. Makes a woman wonder why a federal marshal is more interested in accusations than facts. Mr. Brennan robbed a train, got shot, and crawled into the nearest shelter he could find. That happened to be my root cellar. I found him, refused to help him, and he left. End of story. Is it? Draymond stepped closer, invading my space with deliberate intimidation. Because I'm thinking maybe you're the reason he survived long enough to make this grand surrender. Maybe you've been harboring a fugitive, aiding and abetting. That's a hanging offense, Mrs. Hartley. You have proof of these accusations, Marshal? Mayor Moss asked nervously, because slander against a respectable widow seems beneath your office. Draymond ignored him, his eyes locked on mine. I'll find proof, and when I do, I'll be back for you. Then I guess I'll see you when you have something more than suspicion and a vindictive temperament, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. His fists clenched, his jaw worked, and violence radiated from him like heat from a forge. But Clay spoke up from his chains, his voice carrying a warning edge. You threaten her, Draymond, and our deal is off. I'll recant everything. Tell the governor you coerced my confession. Make enough noise that your career ends in scandal instead of glory. It was a bluff. Clay had no power to do any of that, but Draymond didn't know that. He stepped back, forcing a smile that looked more like a snarl. Just making conversation. No threats intended. He turned to his remaining deputy. Get Brennan to the wagon. We ride out in 30 minutes. They dragged Clay away. I watched him go, our eyes meeting one last time before the door closed between us. Then I was alone with Moss, who sagged into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. That was the bravest and most foolish thing I've ever witnessed, he muttered. You know Draymond will come for you the moment he can, don't you? Let him try. I headed for the door, then paused. Mayor Moss, you have a copy of that surrender agreement? Price has the original, but I made a duplicate. Why? Keep it somewhere safe. Somewhere Draymond can't reach. Because I have a feeling we're going to need proof of what happened here today. I left the mayor's office and walked into the bright afternoon sun. The town was still buzzing with excitement. People clustered in groups, discussing what they'd witnessed, debating whether Clay Brennan was hero or villain. I ignored them all and headed for my horse. Billy appeared beside me as I mounted, his face drawn with worry. They're taking him to Silver Falls. 3-day ride. A lot can happen in 3 days. Then we'd better make sure the right things happen, I said. Did you get what I asked for? He nodded, patting his saddlebag. 2 boxes of ammunition, dried food for a week, and a map showing the back routes to Silver Falls. But Emma, if we follow them and get caught. We won't get caught. We'll stay far enough back that they won't see us. Close enough that we can intervene if things go wrong. You really think Draymond will honor the agreement? I looked toward the marshal's station where deputies were loading Clay into a covered wagon, chains rattling. I think Draymond will do whatever serves his interests. Right now, that means keeping Clay alive long enough to look like a hero. But the moment that calculates differently, Clay's dead. So we're going to make sure the calculation never changes. We rode out of Crimson Ridge heading east, circling wide to avoid the main roads. My plan was to parallel Draymond's route, staying in the hills where we could watch without being seen. It was dangerous and probably futile. 2 people against a dozen armed deputies, but doing nothing felt like a worse betrayal. As we rode, Billy talked. He told me about growing up in Texas, about his father dying in the war and his mother struggling to keep their small ranch running, about meeting Clay when he was just 16, desperate and half-starved, and how Clay had given him work and treated him like family instead of cheap labor. Clay saved my life more than once, Billy said as we crested a ridge overlooking the valley, where Draymond's wagon moved like a toy in the distance. First time was literal. Pulled me out of a flash flood when I was stupid enough to try crossing a swollen river. Second time was slower. He taught me to read, to think, to be something more than just another ranch hand destined to die young and forgotten. You love him, I said. Not a question. Like a brother. Maybe more than a brother. Billy's voice caught. He's the only family I've got left. If Draymond kills him, I don't know what I'll do. We won't let it come to that. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was making promises I couldn't keep. We tracked them for 2 days. Draymond's group moved slowly, the wagon struggling over rough terrain, frequent stops to rest the horses. They camped at night, with guards posted, fires burning against the darkness. Through my husband's old spyglass, I watched Clay sitting in the wagon, still chained, eating whatever scraps they threw him. On the second night, Billy and I made camp in a sheltered ravine 2 miles from Draymond's position. We didn't risk a fire, just ate cold beans and hardtack while the stars wheeled overhead. Something's wrong, Billy said suddenly. I lowered my tin cup. What do you mean? Morrison and his men. They should have caught up by now. It's been 2 days since they went to retrieve the gold. The canyon's only a few hours from town. They should have found it, verified it, and ridden to meet Draymond. He was right. The absence of Morrison's group was conspicuous, unexplained. Either they'd found the gold and decided to take it for themselves, unlikely with Draymond's reputation, or something had gone wrong at Devil's Throat Canyon. Maybe they're having trouble finding the cave, I suggested, but I didn't believe it. Or maybe Clay lied about the location. Billy's voice was flat. Maybe there is no gold at Devil's Throat. Maybe he was buying time. The implications settled over me like a heavy blanket. If Clay had lied, if Morrison returned empty-handed, Draymond would kill him long before they reached Silver Falls. And there would be nothing we could do to stop it. We need to get to that canyon, I said, standing abruptly. We need to know if the gold is there. That's a full day's ride back. We'd never catch up to Draymond afterward. We don't have a choice. If Morrison's about to tell Draymond there's no gold, then Clay is already dead. Our only chance is to find out what's really there and figure out how to fix it before Draymond gets that message. Billy stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. We broke camp immediately, riding through the night with only moonlight to guide us. The horses were exhausted, and so were we, but desperation drove us forward. We reached Devil's Throat Canyon as dawn broke across the desert, painting the rocks in shades of orange and gold. The canyon was aptly named, a narrow slash in the earth that looked like it might swallow you whole. The eastern wall rose sheer and forbidding, dotted with dark openings that could have been caves or just shadows. There, Billy pointed to fresh horse tracks. Morrison's men were here. We followed the tracks to the base of the eastern wall, where someone had set up climbing ropes. Billy scaled up first, nimble despite his exhaustion, and I followed with significantly less grace. 20 feet up, we found the cave opening Clay had described. Inside, the cave was small and dark, smelling of dust and time. Billy struck a match, and in the flickering light we saw it, a wooden crate, exactly as Clay had said. Canvas wrapping, about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide. Billy pried open the crate with his knife. We both leaned in, holding our breath. The crate was filled with rocks. Just rocks, carefully arranged to approximate weight, but utterly worthless. Son of a bitch, Billy whispered. Clay had lied. There was no gold in Devil's Throat Canyon, which meant Morrison's men had already discovered this, and right now they were riding hard to tell Draymond that Clay Brennan had played them all for fools. And when Draymond got that message, Clay would die screaming. We stared at the rocks for maybe 10 heartbeats before Billy started laughing, a wild, slightly unhinged sound that echoed off the cave walls. He lied. He actually lied to a federal marshal, to an entire town, to us. Billy shook his head in disbelief. He's either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. Or both, I said, my mind racing. But why? If there's no gold here, where is it? And why send Morrison on a wild goose chase when he knew it would get him killed? Billy's laughter died. Unless he never planned to make it to Silver Falls alive. Unless this whole surrender was about something else. Like what? Like buying time. Or creating a distraction. Billy looked at me with sudden intensity. Emma, what if the gold isn't missing? What if Clay knows exactly where it is? But he's protecting it from Draymond. Protecting it for who? For Jack Reeves' family. Remember? The foreman who died when the railroad took Clay's land. Clay said he promised to take care of them. What if the whole robbery was about keeping that promise? It made a terrible kind of sense. Clay wasn't motivated by greed. He was motivated by guilt and honor. He'd rob a train to provide for a dead friend's family. But he'd never let that money fall into Draymond's hands, because Draymond represented everything Clay hated about corrupted law. So where's the real gold? I asked. Billy was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his eyes widened. Your homestead. What? Think about it. Clay didn't stumble onto your property by accident. He was heading there specifically. He knew the location, knew the layout. Why would he know those things unless he'd been there before? My stomach dropped as I remembered something Clay had mentioned in passing during his recovery. He said Jack Reeves had a wife and 2 kids. He said he'd promised to look after them. Jack's wife, Sarah, Billy said slowly. She had a sister. I remember Clay mentioning it once. The sister married a rancher out in this territory. Moved here before the war. Her name, I whispered, understanding blooming like a dark flower. What was her sister's name? I don't remember. But Emma, what was your husband's first name? Jacob. My voice sounded distant in my own ears. Jacob Hartley. And his first wife, the one who died before I met him. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Reeves. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Jacob had been married to Jack Reeves' wife's sister. That made Jack family. Made his children my husband's nieces and nephews. And Clay had known this. Had known that the best place to hide $50,000 in gold wasn't in some remote canyon, but right under the nose of federal marshals, buried on the property of a widow who had no idea she was sitting on a fortune. It's at your homestead. Billy breathed. The gold is buried at your homestead. That's why he came to you. That's why he risked everything to protect you from Draymond, because he hid the gold there, and he needs you alive to make sure it gets to the right people. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. Where? Where on my property? Root cellar, Billy said with certainty. That false wall you mentioned. Jacob built it during the war, right? Clay probably knew about it from Jack. It would be the perfect hiding spot, accessible, defendable, and the last place anyone would look because the marshals already searched it. We scrambled down from the cave and ran for our horses. If we were right, if the gold was at my homestead, then Morrison's men might have already figured it out. They could be tearing my place apart right now. Or worse, waiting to ambush us when we returned. The ride back took every ounce of endurance we had left. We pushed the horses to the brink of collapse, trading speed for survival. The sun climbed and fell, night returned, and still we rode through darkness, guided by stars and desperation. We reached my homestead 2 hours before dawn. From the ridge overlooking the property, we could see that we were too late. Horses were tied outside, 4 of them. Lamplight glowed in the cabin windows. Morrison and his men had figured out the truth and beaten us here. We need a plan, Billy whispered. But I was already moving, fury overriding caution. They were in my home, destroying what little I had left, and I was done being afraid. I pulled my rifle and started down the slope. Billy caught up, grabbed my arm. Emma, stop. There are 4 of them. 2 of us, and they're armed. Then we'd better shoot straight. We approached from the blind side, using the chicken coop and woodshed for cover. Through the cabin window, I could see Morrison and 3 deputies tearing through my belongings, overturning furniture, ripping up floorboards, destroying everything in their search. "Check the cellar again," Morrison barked. "It's got to be here somewhere. Brennan wouldn't have come all this way for nothing." 2 deputies headed for the root cellar. Morrison and the remaining man stayed in the cabin, continuing their destructive search. Billy and I moved to intercept the deputies heading outside. We waited until they were far enough from the cabin that shouts wouldn't carry, then stepped out of the shadows with rifles raised. "Don't move," I said quietly. "Don't even breathe loud." The deputies froze. They were young, maybe 25, and in the moonlight, they looked more scared than dangerous. "We don't want trouble," one of them stammered. "We're just doing our job." "Your job is tearing apart my home." I kept the rifle steady. "Get on the ground. Face down. Billy, tie them." Billy used rope from the shed to secure them quickly and efficiently. We gagged them with their own bandanas and left them behind the chicken coop, where they wouldn't be immediately visible. That left Morrison and 1 other deputy in the cabin. 2 against 2. Better odds. We moved to the front door. Inside, I could hear Morrison's frustrated cursing as he failed to find what he was looking for. I looked at Billy, who nodded once. Then I kicked the door open and stepped inside with my rifle raised. "U.S. Marshal business," Morrison started, then stopped when he saw my face. "Mrs. Hartley, you're making a serious mistake interfering with federal agents." "The only mistake was thinking I'd let you destroy my home without consequence." I kept the rifle aimed at his chest. "Your other 2 men are tied up outside. Your options are surrender or join them the hard way." Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. "You're harboring stolen property. That makes you a criminal." "What I'm harboring is my patience, and you're testing the last of it." Gun on the floor. Now, the standoff lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the deputy beside Morrison made his move, drawing his revolver in a smooth motion. Billy fired first, the shot deafening in the small cabin, and the deputy went down with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Morrison drew his gun, but I was faster. My rifle shot took him in the leg, dropping him to his knees. His revolver clattered across the floor. "Next one goes through your head," I said, chambering another round. "Your choice." Morrison raised his hands, blood seeping through his pants. "You just assaulted federal officers. You're done, Mrs. Hartley." "Done? Maybe. But you're the one bleeding on my floor." I gestured to Billy. "Get their weapons. Tie them up with their friend outside." As Billy secured the deputies, I finally allowed myself to check what I'd been avoiding. The root cellar. The false wall. The truth Clay had left buried in my home without my knowledge or consent. I descended into the cellar with a lantern, moved the crates aside, and pulled away the false wall section. Behind it, exactly where Billy had predicted, sat 3 canvas-wrapped bundles. I opened one. Gold bars gleamed in the lamplight. $50,000 in stolen federal gold, hidden in my home by an outlaw who trusted me with his life and his secret without ever asking permission. I should have been angry, should have felt betrayed, but instead, I felt something else entirely. A strange mixture of awe and responsibility. Clay had given me the power to choose what happened to this fortune. I could turn it over to the law, could use it to buy my own future, or could honor the promise he'd made to Jack Reeves' family. I carried one bundle upstairs and set it on the table in front of Morrison, who stared at it with undisguised greed. "That's it," he breathed. "That's the stolen gold." "Part of it," I confirmed. "And here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride to Silver Falls and tell Marshal Draymond that you found the gold exactly where Clay Brennan said it would be. You're going to tell him the delay was because the cave was hard to access and you want it to be thorough. Why would I lie for you? Because if you tell the truth, Clay dies, and so do you. Clay will tell everyone about the deal we made, how you were supposed to verify the gold and meet him in Silver Falls, but instead you went rogue trying to steal it for yourself. Who do you think Draymond will believe? His subordinate who violated orders, or the outlaw who's cooperated fully? Morrison's face went pale as he realized the trap. If he admitted there was no gold in Devil's Throat Canyon, he'd have to explain why it took him 3 days to discover that, and why he then went to my homestead without orders. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to keep Clay alive long enough to reach Silver Falls and stand trial. I want you to convince Draymond that Clay kept his word, and I want you to forget you ever came to this homestead. And if I do all that, then when this is over and the dust settles, maybe a grateful widow will testify that you acted with honor and professionalism. Maybe that testimony will help your career more than whatever bonus Draymond was offering for the gold." It was a flimsy deal built on mutual self-interest and fear, but Morrison was smart enough to recognize he had no better options. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "I want half that gold as insurance. You'll get 1 bar now. The rest after Clay's trial, if you keep your word." I wrapped a single gold bar in cloth and handed it to him. "Betray me, and I'll make sure everyone knows you're a thief and a traitor. Keep the faith, and you might just survive this with your career intact." Billy patched up Morrison's leg wound while I freed the other deputies and explained the situation in terms that emphasized their survival depended on their silence. They were scared, hurt, and smart enough to realize they'd walked into something far more complex than the simple gold recovery. We sent them riding towards Silver Falls just as dawn broke across the desert. I watched them disappear into the growing light, wondering if I'd just made the best or worst decision of my life. "What now?" Billy asked. "Now we finish this. We ride to Silver Falls. We make sure Clay gets his trial, and we figure out how to get Jack Reeves' family their money without ending up hanged." That's a tall order. Everything about this situation is a tall order. I looked at my ruined home, at the gold still hidden in my cellar, at the blood staining my floor. But we're committed now, for better or worse. Silver Falls was a real town, not like Crimson Ridge with its sun-bleached desperation. Silver Falls had brick buildings, paved streets, a courthouse with actual pillars, and the kind of civilization that came from railroad money and Eastern investment. It also had crowds, people drawn by news of Clay Brennan's surrender, eager for the spectacle of an outlaw's trial. Billy and I arrived a day after Morrison's group, exhausted and filthy from the hard ride. We found lodging at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chun, who asked no questions and provided hot baths and clean clothes for reasonable rates. "The trial starts tomorrow," Mrs. Chun told us over breakfast. "Whole town's talking about it. Some say Brennan's a hero who robbed from the corrupt railroad. Others say he's a murderer who deserves hanging. The judge names Elijah Stone. He's supposed to be fair, but he's also ambitious. Word is he wants to run for territorial governor." "Where are they keeping Brennan?" I asked. "County jail, 2 blocks from here. Marshal Draymond's got him under heavy guard. 6 deputies working in shifts. Apparently, they're worried someone might try to break him out." Billy and I exchanged looks. Breaking Clay out hadn't occurred to me, but now that Mrs. Chin mentioned it, the idea had a certain appeal. Except we'd worked so hard to legitimize his surrender, to make this about law and civilization instead of violence. Rescuing him now would undo everything. After breakfast, I walked to the county jail. Draymond's deputies stopped me at the door, but when I explained I was a witness to Clay's surrender in Crimson Ridge, they grudgingly allowed me 5 minutes. They led me to a cell in the back, a small cage with iron bars and a narrow window that let in a slice of daylight. Clay sat on a wooden bench, his chains attached to a ring in the wall. He looked thin, worn, but his eyes were still sharp. "Emma," he stood as much as the chains allowed. "You shouldn't have come. Draymond knows you helped me. He's building a case against you. Let him try." I moved closer to the bars, lowering my voice. "Morrison delivered your gold to Draymond. Claimed he found it in Devil's Throat Canyon, exactly where you said. The delay was explained as difficulty accessing the cave." Clay's eyes widened. "How?" "Later. Right now, you need to know that Draymond believes you kept your word. That should help with the trial. But Clay, I hesitated. Why didn't you tell me? About the gold. About Jacob's connection to Jack Reeves. About using my property as your hiding place. Guilt flashed across his face. Because if you'd known, you could be charged as an accomplice. This way, you had plausible deniability. I was protecting you. By making me an unwitting criminal. By keeping you innocent. He gripped the bars. Emma, I never meant for any of this to touch you. I thought I'd recover, get the gold, and disappear before you ever knew what I'd done. But then the fever hit, and Draymond closed in, and everything went sideways. What's your plan now? You're going on trial for robbery and murder. Even with a fair judge, the odds aren't good. The plan is to tell the truth. About the railroad, about Jack, about why I robbed that train. Maybe it won't save me, but maybe it'll make people think about whether the law serves justice or just serves itself. He managed a bitter smile. And if I hang, at least I'll hang knowing Jack's family will be taken care of. That's what matters. Time's up, a deputy called. I reached through the bars and squeezed Clay's hand once. Don't give up. You've got more people fighting for you than you know. The trial began the next morning in a courtroom packed with spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers. Judge Elijah Stone presided, a stern man in his 50s with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Theodore Price sat at the defense table, looking nervous but determined. The prosecution was led by a territorial attorney named Bradford Keene, who had the polished cruelty of someone who'd never questioned whether he was on the right side. Draymond sat in the front row, watching everything with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd already won. The trial proceeded methodically. Keene presented evidence of the robbery, eyewitness testimony from train passengers, the bodies of the 3 guards, the stolen gold that Morrison had recovered from Devil's Throat Canyon. Each piece of evidence was damning, painting Clay as a violent criminal who'd killed for money. Then Price called his first witness, me. I took the stand with my heart pounding, swore on a Bible I wasn't sure I believed in anymore, and faced Keene's skeptical glare. Mrs. Hartley, Price began gently, please tell the court how you came to know the defendant. I told them everything. How Clay had collapsed in my root cellar. How I tended his wounds despite knowing who he was. How Draymond's men had terrorized the territory in their search for him. I told them about the 2 homesteads Draymond had burned, about the farmer and his son killed in Cold Creek, about the climate of fear that made hiding an outlaw seem less dangerous than cooperating with the law. Keene objected repeatedly, calling my testimony hearsay and irrelevant. But Judge Stone allowed it, and I could see the jury listening, really listening, to what life was like under Draymond's version of justice. When Keene cross-examined me, he went for the throat. Mrs. Hartley, isn't it true that you harbored a known fugitive, giving him food and shelter while federal marshals searched for him? I gave medical aid to a dying man. That's not a crime. You knew he was an outlaw. I knew he was bleeding to death in my root cellar. I also knew that Marshal Draymond was burning homes and killing innocent people in his pursuit. I made a choice to save a life instead of enabling murder. Murder? You're accusing a federal marshal of murder. I'm stating facts. 2 homesteads burned. 1 farmer and his son dead. Multiple reports of excessive force. If that's not murder, Mr. Keene, then I don't know what is. The courtroom erupted. Judge Stone hammered his gavel, calling for order. Draymond's face went purple with rage. I'd said what needed saying, and I saw several jury members nodding. The trial continued for 2 more days. Billy testified about Clay's character, about how he'd taken in a starving orphan and treated him like family. A retired Union officer testified that Clay had served honorably during the war, saving lives at great personal risk. Even Mayor Moss made an appearance, reluctantly confirming that Clay's surrender had been voluntary and peaceful. But the most powerful moment came when Clay himself took the stand. Price asked him directly, Mr. Brennan, did you rob the Crimson Ridge train? Yes, I did. Did you kill 3 guards during that robbery? They drew on us first. It was self-defense. But yes, I killed them, and I carry that weight every day. Why did you rob the train? Clay told them everything. About his ranch in Colorado. About the railroad using legal theft to steal his land and water rights. About Jack Reeves, his foreman and friend, gunned down by railroad enforcers. About the promise he'd made to take care of Jack's widow and children. About how the law had failed him at every turn, leaving him with no recourse but to take back what had been stolen. "I'm not proud of what I did," Clay said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "I broke the law. I killed men. I became what I hated. But I did it because the law itself had become corrupt, because justice had been bought and sold by men with more money than morals. If I'm guilty of anything, it's believing that some promises matter more than some laws." Keene destroyed him on cross-examination, pointing out that vigilante justice was still murder, that Clay's grievances didn't give him the right to rob and kill. He was technically correct, and we all knew it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their faces were grave. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Stone asked. "We have, Your Honor." The foreman stood. "On the charge of robbery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder, we find the defendant guilty, with a recommendation for leniency due to extenuating circumstances." The courtroom exploded again. Draymond smiled triumphantly. Price slumped in his chair, and Clay just closed his eyes, accepting the verdict with the calm of a man who'd expected nothing better. Judge Stone banged his gavel. "Mr. Brennan, you have been found guilty of robbery and murder under territorial law. The recommended sentence for these crimes is death by hanging. However, this court acknowledges the jury's recommendation for leniency and the unusual circumstances of your case. Therefore, I sentence you to 20 years hard labor at the territorial prison in Carson City, with possibility of parole after 10 years. You will also forfeit all rights to the stolen gold, which will be returned to the railroad company minus restitution for the families of the deceased guards." It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't death either. In the world of frontier justice, it was as close to mercy as Clay could have hoped for. They took him away in chains. I pushed through the crowd and caught his "I won last time." He nodded to me, a small gesture of gratitude and farewell. Outside the courthouse, Draymond intercepted me. "You think you won something here?" His voice was low and venomous. "You think you beat me? I'll be watching you, Mrs. Hartley. And the moment you step wrong, I'll make sure you join Brennan in prison." "Marshal Draymond." Judge Stone's voice cut through the threat. He'd followed us outside. "I believe you have recovered gold to transport back to the railroad company. I suggest you focus on that duty instead of harassing witnesses. Unless you'd like me to file a complaint with your superiors about conduct unbecoming a federal officer." Draymond glared at both of us, then stalked away. Stone turned to me, his stern face softening slightly. "That was brave testimony, Mrs. Hartley. Also reckless. Draymond is a dangerous man, and he doesn't forgive easily." "Neither do I, Your Honor." He smiled faintly. "I suspected as much. A word of advice. Leave this territory for a while. Let things cool down. You've made powerful enemies, and they have long memories." "I'll consider it." I lied. I had no intention of running. That night, Billy and I sat in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, drinking terrible whiskey and processing everything that had happened. 20 years, Billy said, staring into his glass. "He'll be an old man when he gets out, if he survives prison at all. But he'll be alive. That's more than we could have hoped for a week ago." "What about Jack's family? The gold?" "I'd been thinking about that. The railroad is getting back what Morrison turned in. Maybe 15,000 worth. The rest is still hidden in my root cellar. I'll find Jack's widow, explain everything, and make sure she gets what Clay promised her. It won't bring back her husband, but it'll give her and her children a chance at a better life." "You're risking a lot. If Draymond finds out." "Let him find out. I'm done being afraid of men like him." The next morning, I prepared to leave Silver Falls, but before I departed, I visited the jail one last time. They let me see Clay for 5 minutes, under close supervision. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for saving my life, for fighting for me, for being braver than I had any right to expect." "Thank you for trusting me," I replied, "and for showing me that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. What will you do now?" "I'll deliver your promise. Then I'll rebuild my home. And I'll remember that one outlaw taught me more about justice than all the marshals and judges in the territory." Clay smiled, a real smile this time, unguarded and warm. "If I ever get out of prison, I'm going to find you and help you run that homestead. Fair warning, I'll hold you to that." I rode out of Silver Falls as the sun climbed toward noon, Billy beside me, the weight of hidden gold secured in our saddlebags. Behind us, the town returned to its normal rhythms, the trial already fading into gossip and legend. But I carried it with me, the memory of a wounded outlaw who'd trusted me with his life, the knowledge that justice was complicated and mercy was rare, and the certainty that sometimes the hardest choices were the ones that made you truly free. 3 weeks later, I found Sarah Reeves living in a small house in New Mexico with her 2 children. When I explained why I'd come, when I showed her the gold and told her about Clay's promise, she wept. "He did this?" she asked, clutching her children. "Clay risked everything for us. He kept his word to Jack. Every promise, to the end. I left them the gold, all of it except 1 bar, which I kept as insurance and a reminder. Then I rode back to my homestead in Crimson Ridge, to the damaged cabin and the land that had seen so much violence and sacrifice. I rebuilt. Slowly, painfully, but I rebuilt. And every time I worked the stubborn earth or watched the sun set over the desert, I thought about Clay Brennan, outlaw, hero, friend, and the stolen gold that had bought something far more valuable than money. It had bought proof that in a world of corrupted law and brutal men, there were still people willing to risk everything for a promise, for justice, for the hope that mercy might somehow survive in the heart of the Wild West. See you around, my friend. I've got another story for you.